Hello, and welcome to this evening's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith, featuring author Catriona Ward, author of The Last House on Needless Street, in conversation with Joe Hill. And this book just came out yesterday, so everyone give it a huge round of applause for being out in the world. I can't hear you, but I do believe in you. My name is Alex Schaffner, and I am the events director at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. If you know our store, welcome back. If you have never heard of us before, welcome. It is excellent to have you as a part of our community tonight. And we appreciate everybody who's here for supporting Kat and Joe, good horror fiction, and your independent bookstore with your book purchases, with your ticket purchases, and with your general pleasant appearing here. It really is a privilege and a delight to welcome moderator Joe Hill. It's been a while since we've seen him in person, but Joe is always one of our favorite visitors to the store. And in addition to being the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Full Throttle, Strange Weather, and The Fireman, Joe is an incredible cheerleader for his fellow horror writers. So it is great to have him here. And I can't wait to hear what questions he's got for Kat about what is seriously one of my favorite books of this year. So tonight, I'm so excited to welcome Catriona Ward to discuss her new novel, The Last House on Needless Street. I have been genuinely throwing this title at everyone I can. Our customers, my friends who hate horror novels and are going to have to read this one anyway, our store's book buyer, just everybody. I am really excited that this book is in the world. Catriona, the author herself, was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in the U.S., Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen, and Morocco. She studied English at Oxford and later the creative writing masters at the University of East Anglia. She won the August Derleth Award for Best Horror Novel for her debut, The Girl from Raw Blood, and again for Little Eve, making her the first woman to win the prize twice. Little Eve also won the Shirley Jackson Award, e.g. the Best Author Ever Award for Best Novel, and is published by Nightfire. Last House on Needless Street is phenomenal. Since I read it months ago, I've been thinking about it nonstop. And I really mean that. I mean, several times a week, months later, I find myself stewing in its voice and its slowly uncurling plot and the way that it makes terror and uncertainty into this breathing thing and then breathes an impossible level of compassion into all of that. This book is a tightly plotted and beautifully written and hair-raising novel of things not as they seem. In a boarded-up house at the end of a fairly normal street is a family that hides away. A father who fears everything, a daughter raging and childish, and a cat, Bible reading, a little bit gay, self-possessed. They barely go outside. At the seaside nearby, years ago, there was a disappearance. A young girl now survived only by her sister, who searches and searches, and when she finds what she is looking for, she'll be ready to act. The answers to both of these stories are intertwined, but they're not expected. There were a couple points in reading this book where I thought I might have to put it down because it was too intense or too hard or too rich for my blood, but the payoff is exactly what her characters deserve. And as a reader, I was entranced. All I can say is that Kat knows what she's doing from the word go, and I'm very excited to hear her dance around her secrets. So without further ado, let's welcome Kat Ward and Joe Hill.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Alex. And thank you so much for having me as well, all of you. Thank you for turning up from all over to come say hi on my launch day.
We have London, Utah, Alberta, Tokyo, NYC,
wow,
Maine, Glasgow.
Welcome, everyone. This is amazing.
Kat, did you want to read a little bit from the book?
Yes, I will. I'll start as is traditional at the beginning. And actually, this is very exciting for me because this is the first time, today is the first time I ever held finished copies in my hands. So they arrived about 4 hours ago.
What a great cover.
It's so amazing, isn't it? So beautiful. It's by Corey Brickley, who's an incredible designer. And
the cat prominently featured.
I know, everybody screams when they see the little cat. Also, a wonderful thing about writing this book is I get so many, my Twitter timeline is just cats, which is fantastic. I couldn't like it more, really. I will just dive straight in, as one does with books. Ted Bannerman. Today is the anniversary of Little Girl with Popsicle. It happened by the lake 11 years ago. She was there, and then she wasn't. So it's already a bad day when I discover that there is a murderer among us. Olivia lands heavily on my stomach first thing, making high-pitched noises like clockwork. If there's anything better than a cat on the bed, I don't know about it. I fuss over her because when Lauren arrives later, she will vanish. My daughter and my cat won't be in the same room. I'm up, I say. It's your turn to make breakfast. She looks at me with those yellow-green eyes and then pads away. She finds a disk of sun, flings herself down and blinks in my direction. Cats don't get jokes. I think I fetched the newspaper from the front step. I like the local because it has a rare bird alert. You can write in if you see something special, like a northern flicker or a Siberian accentor. And even this early, the dim air is warm as soup. The street feels even quieter than usual, hushed like it's remembering. When I see the front page, my stomach goes into curls and knots. There she is. I forgot it was today. I'm not so good with time. They always use the same picture. Her eyes are big in the shadow of her hat brim, the fingers clenched on a stick as if she thinks someone might take it away from her. Her hair lies wet and sheeny on her skull, short as a boy's. She has been swimming, but no one is wrapping her in a fluffy towel to dry her. I don't like that. She might catch cold. They don't print the other picture, the one of me. They got in big trouble for that, though not big enough, if you ask me. She was 6. Everyone was upset. We have a problem with that around here, especially by the lake. So things happened fast. The police searched the houses of everyone in the county who might hurt children. I wasn't allowed to wait inside while they did it, so I stood out on the steps. It was summer, bright and hot as the surface of a star. My skin burned slowly as the afternoon wore on. I listened as they pushed back the ugly blue rug in the living room and tore up the floorboards, knocked a hole in the wall in the back of my closet because they thought it sounded hollow. Dogs went all over my yard, my bedroom, everything. I knew what kind of dogs they were. They had the white trees of death in their eyes. A thin man with a camera came and took pictures as I stood there. I didn't think to stop him. No picture, no story, he said to me as he left. And I didn't know what that meant, but he waved goodbye in a cheerful way, so I waved back. What is it, Mr. Bannerman? The woman detective looked like a possum, very tired. Nothing. I was shaking. Got to be quiet, little Teddy. My teeth made little clicks like I was cold, but I was so hot. You were yelling my name and the word green, I believe. I must have been thinking about this story I made up when I was a kid about these lost boys who turned into green things at the lake. She gave me a look. I know it well. I get that look all the time. I had held tight to the trunk of the little oak in the front yard, and the tree lent me its strength. Was there something to tell? If so, it hovered just over the edge of my thoughts. Mr. Bannerman, is this your only residence? No other property around here? No hunting cabin? Nothing like that? She wiped sweat off her top lip. Care pressed down on her like an anvil on her back. No, I said, no. She wouldn't understand about the weekend place. The police went away in the end. They had to, because I was at the 7-Eleven all afternoon, and everyone says so. The security tape says so. What I used to do there was I would sit outside on the sidewalk by the sliding doors, and when they parted with a whoosh and released people in a blast of cold air, I asked for candy. And sometimes if they had it, they gave it to me. And sometimes they even bought it for me. Mummy would have been so ashamed if she knew, but I loved candy so much. I never went near the lake or little girl with popsicle. When they finally finished and let me back in the house, I could smell them all over. Traces of cologne, sweat, squeaky rubber and chemicals. I was upset that they'd seen my precious things, like the picture of Mummy and Daddy. The photograph was fading even then, their features growing pale. They were leaving me, vanishing into white. And then there was the broken music box on the mantel. Mummy brought it from her faraway home. The music box didn't play. I broke it the same day I smashed the Russian dolls, the day of the thing with the mouse. The little ballerina was snapped from her stem, felled and dead. Maybe I felt worst about her. I call her Eloise. I don't know why. She just looks like an Eloise. I heard Mummy's beautiful voice in my ear. You take everything from me, Theodore. Take, take, take. Those people had looked at all my stuff with their eyes and thoughts, and the house didn't feel like mine anymore. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply to calm myself. When I opened them again, the Russian doll smiled fatly back. Beside her sat the music box. Eloise, the ballerina, stood proud and upright, arms perfect and poised above her head. Mummy and Daddy smiled down from the photograph. My beautiful orange rug was like soft pills underfoot. I felt better right away. Everything was okay. I was home. Olivia's head butted my palm. I laughed and picked her up. That made me feel even better. But overhead, in the attic, the green boys stirred.
That's wonderful. Listening to it, I read the book half a year ago now, maybe a little bit longer. And I'm reminded what a deft touch you have with individual characters' voices. There is a kind of kaleidoscopic feel to character in this book. The way you shift from voice to voice to voice, and each is so distinct and sort of lush to listen to. So that was awesome. The approach to character is only one of the things I really admire about the book. I think it's as full of brilliant misdirections as Gone Girl. I thought it was as disturbing as a season of Mindhunter, or Seven, which dates me. The fact that I'm, Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box dates me for sure. But I also thought, and Alex mentioned this at the beginning, I also thought that the book was ultimately about as touching and lovely as a work of fiction can be. So anyway, I'm excited for people to discover it. I have a bunch of, it's Last House on Needless Street is a horror novel. It's a thriller. It is I think it's a kind of, literary wonder. And boy, do I have questions. But the first question I've got for you is the most important of the evening. There's not another one that we could touch on that matters more. How do you pronounce your first name? And have I pronounced it wrong? Have I been pronouncing it wrong for about 2 years now? I mostly call you Cat, which is the safest thing to do, but maybe I've had it wrong for 3 years.
No, it's maddening because I actually pronounce it wrong on the phone sometimes myself because people won't understand it if I pronounce it the correct way. It's Catriona.
Catriona.
Catriona. Catriona, yes.
Catriona.
Catriona.
Oh, okay. All right.
But Cat.
So I've had it wrong for 3. So I have in fact had it wrong for 3 years.
I mean, I probably told it to you wrong. I tend to even mispronounce it when I introduce myself because it's just not worth the minute of back and forth. Especially if it's like a party or something, you're like, what? But yeah, Catriona, but Cat, I think is fine.
So how long were you working on Last House, and where did it start? It's a very intricate book. So the correct answer is please not. It took about a weekend.
No, it really didn't. So don't worry about that. It was actually, although it was the book that I've written in the shortest space of time. It took just over a year, but it was a year of kind of almost obsessive. It was like a creature in my head scratching to get out. I just couldn't ignore it. And it had a real evolution in terms of what it wanted to be. So I've always been really fascinated by serial killers and their pets, because you've got this person who's completely devoid of affect and doesn't have any, doesn't really have any empathy at all. And also that strange paradox of quite often serial killers start out by harming animals,
right?
And yet they form these really strong relationships with animals. Like Dennis Nielsen had this dog called Bleep, when all he cared about when he was arrested was what happened to Bleep. And Myra Hindley had a dog called Poppet, which actually is one of the more unnerving stories I've ever heard. So with the Moors murderers, they found a lot of the graves by looking at these photographs that they took of themselves, sort of like triumphantly standing over these patches of moorland, and they gradually worked out that actually perhaps they were standing on these particular places because they might be significant to them of what they've left there.
Right.
One of the only ways they could date these pictures was by dating the dog. So they sedated the dog and sort of carbon dated it, but unfortunately Poppet did not make it through. Poppet died on the table, but he or she, I'm not sure which it was a key witness in identifying the location of a lot of the remains.
Wow, that's
really
amazing.
strange. Yeah, and after Poppet died, Myra Hindley was just inconsolable. This, this person who had committed atrocities couldn't get over the fact her dog had died. So I found that really interesting, and just one of those strange contradictions in life that just makes you go, oh, I'd love to explore that.
Yeah.
And I thought also, isn't domesticity a bit like captivity in itself? An animal is forced to love someone because they've got no choice. They're forced into a bond with someone who is probably quite dangerous. So that's where it sort of started out. And it was kind of a story about a naive narrator, which is the cat, who's the real litmus test of this book, right, is the cat. If you get past the cat in the talking gay cat in chapter 2, then this is the book for you. If you don't,
it's arguably one of the great cat narrators in the history of fiction.
Are there many? I don't know. But yeah,
let us know in the chat if there are other books with cat narrators, especially for adults, because I'm sure there must be some young adult fiction narrated from the cat's point of view.
But there must be, mustn't there? But it felt, in this particular way of doing it, I hadn't quite seen that story. But then, so what I discovered while I was writing it from that perspective initially is it wasn't a broad enough canvas. There was such a bigger story to be told about trauma and survival and things like that. And it just, so as you know, it became quite a different animal, if you will,
yes.
Quite quickly as it developed. But that was the
wait. I just want to just some people will have read the book and some people have not. So we will step carefully to avoid spoilers. This is a book where there's some amazing revelations that I wouldn't want to ruin for anyone.
No.
So you did realize fairly early on your intentions with the story. That wasn't something you came to after 3 or 4 drafts. You were still in early play when you realized where you were taking things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found that, and I realized one of the things I had to do, again, stepping carefully, was a lot of research into the situations that I was putting my characters into. So I went away and talked to some people who've been through these things, which is kind of amazing, without giving anything away. Like, the resilience of the human mind is something that's quite mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And people's ability to survive and even thrive in situations which should really just destroy you. It's kind of humbling, really. So it grew very much from there. And I wanted to use, because I love horror. I'm a great, I'm a great sort of like in the tradition of hopefully in the tradition of like horror writing. I love its reciprocity with the reader, and I love the tropes and the familiarity and the sort of dialogue it has with the reader, and the way that there are familiar pathways that you walk, and like you evoke a certain thing and the reader knows what you're doing. So I wanted to use the tools of horror to do something a little bit different, without again getting too spoilery.
It is though. It is. I mean, I'm sure this is slightly maddening for people who haven't read the book yet, but it is a corrective. In some ways, I thought it was a fascinating corrective to, not to use an overused word, but some kinds of representation that has existed in horror fiction. And I love to see that, because I'm a guy who believes that at bottom, the best horror fiction is always about empathy. And there is a lot of that coming from some very unexpected directions in the book. One thing that struck me about the story is that everyone has a secret.
Yeah.
Head has one, Thee has one, even the cat has one.
Yeah.
Did you know what they were keeping, what each of the characters were keeping secrets from the start, or did you fumble your way to it?
I didn't. I think they would the engine behind those characters was always their secrets. I think they sort of started with their secrets. I find that sort of, I find that sort of quite lifelike as well. That's a very close first person narrative, with so much concealed from the reader. It feels like life, really.
Yeah.
It sort of strips away all of those, because, you know, we need fiction to make more sense than life. Usually we need it to have like rules and plot and
Right.
character progression and you know, a satisfying finale. And life doesn't, just so notably lacks all of those things. So I found writing those narrative, it does. And I found that, like, I find that that's a very close first person, so close you're almost wearing them like a skin as the reader and as the writer as well. What you're kind of, it feels to me like sort of verisimilitude, really. It feels like it feels like you're stripping away all the securities that you come to demand from fiction, and the secrets are a big part of that, because you don't walk into a room with, you know, a group of people and know automatically, you know, from the omniscient narrator who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. You just don't know, and sometimes it changes. And I find that an incredibly instinctive way to write. So that I think the secrets are a huge part of how one constructs it. Also, I trained as an actor as well. I think that maybe might be a part of that as well, because that's in terms of like the classical construction of character, like if you're doing Stanislavskian, you know, where everyone has an objective and an obstacle and a secret. Maybe that's a hangover of that as well. But it feels very natural, like feeling completely at a loss as to what's going on in the book. It feels very like being in the world to me.
Did reading Stanislavski help you think about character? Should I be reading him?
Yeah.
I'm not an actor, but
yeah,
but I'm always hungry to find out what I don't know.
Well, I think that you instinctively do that anyway. I think writers do, because to realize something on the page, I think they do quite naturally what he's asking you to do anyway. It's just a formalized way of thinking about it. Meisner and Stanislavski, my acting school was very big on. So I think I may have carried that into it. But I do think you do it naturally. I don't think you need to go back to school for it.
Just getting pinged. So well, what I was thinking about is, you know, at heart, all the really good fiction is also mystery fiction, and that the mystery is, you know, not who done it, but who are they? That we read to find out the truth about each individual character, and there's something always very satisfying when it turns out the truth of that individual character is, you know, feels earned but stunning. Sort of like, oh, it all makes sense now. On the subject of mystery, I spoke to the mystery writer Richard Osman yesterday.
Oh yeah,
and
wonderful.
One of his readers had a very good question for him. She wanted to know if Osman works backwards from the ending, knowing how it's all going to come out, or if he writes forward and allows the story to take him wherever it wants to go. And I think that same question is maybe especially well suited to this book.
Yeah. What did he say?
He said he just plodded along forward. You know, that he just started with chapter 1, and when he couldn't figure out what to do with one character, he would switch to another. And then a lot of his way, you know, that he does have an ending in mind. But then a lot of his way of providing clues is to get to the ending and then go back and seed them in.
Yeah, and that sounds very sensible. I with this, I knew where I was going, but I had absolutely no bloody idea how I was going to get there. So every day was like, it really did feel like, it felt like a dangerous process. I would sit down every day and go, I genuinely don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm capable of it as a person and as a writer, as it is. It was the strangest thing my mind could conjure. And so every day was a sort of like, let's just see if today's the day I die. And I've never really had that experience with every book is different, isn't it? Like all their own private hell. But this one felt like every day I thought I might just have to give up today, because I don't know if I'm good enough to do this, or I don't know if it's possible to do this. And in the end, making my way towards the finale just consisted of letting go of a lot of stuff that I think I thought I needed as a writer, which was interesting. Like, I think for I'm very fond of my first two novels, but they're much more traditional. They're historical Gothic, and they're
Yeah.
they're set in very classic Gothic periods. And I think there was a lot of safety for me in embedding myself in that classical tradition and using that as a structure and using that whereas with Needless Street, as you know, that all goes out the window. I mean, it's very much a madhouse, a carnival of mirrors. And I think letting go of my need to create like the platonic ideal of a Gothic novel was really important with this, because I definitely just I threw everything I thought I knew out the window, which is very refreshing, actually.
I find that fascinating. That you would say essentially, it seems to me essentially you're saying that you wrote the first two books from a place of comfort and familiarity. And then
Although it didn't feel like that at the time. It didn't feel like that.
Okay, good. Oh, okay, all right. That's actually sort of a relief to hear, because I'm always scared.
It didn't feel like comfort and familiarity. But in the terror of the blank page,
right?
The way that I surmounted that was that I clung to things I knew, and even though you're using them and maybe even subverting them, it's still you working within an architecture that's quite familiar, and it was a bit of a comfort blanket. They were still incredibly difficult. I mean, I don't think there's anything more difficult than the second novel. That's real. Like the difficult second book. I had terrible problems writing it, because I think if you've done what did you?
Yeah, it almost rocked me.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an imaginary problem, is it?
No, I mean, I actually thought I was never going to write again. Like I wrote the first book, and I was probably halfway through the third book before suddenly I was like, oh yeah, I guess I can do this, but yeah, no, I
think could be a fluke.
Problem is real.
Yeah. Once could be a fluke. If you can do it once, you might just be a chancer who can pull off like a turn.
Yeah.
But if you can do it twice, there's a slight chance you might be able to just do it.
Just doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
I'm glad you had that too.
This is sort of a good segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you, because I did want to talk about the earlier work. Little Eve and Raw Blood, the novels that preceded this one, racked up awards. They both won the August Derleth Prize, which is pretty amazing. Little Eve was a Guardian Best Book of the Year. So I think it's sort of natural to wonder, when did you start writing, and how did your process develop? So how did you approach the act at first, and then what is a day of work like for you now? I mean, I think it's a relief for aspiring writers to hear that you didn't just spring onto the scene fully formed.
No. Well, Raw Blood was my first novel, but it took me 7 years. So I think I probably wrote about 17 Raw Bloods before I got to the version, and I remember actually, I always do think of it as a sort of like scratching inside your head, like a cat at the door or something. That's when you got the story, but when you're a new writer, it's very, very difficult to know how to implement that. Like what you don't have the tools at your disposal to render on the page your this sort of idea in your mind. And I spent 7 years, most of it, I think 6 of them, being a terrible writer, but that's me teaching myself to write.
Right.
And I think that was obviously really important. But it was a constant sort of like it felt like kind of banging your head against the wall every day when you sort of sit down to do it. And in terms of process, because I was also working full time at the time, and you do it when you can.
What were you doing?
And I was working for a human rights foundation in London.
And then so that was like the 40-hour-a-week job. So when did you work? When you got
weekends
home?
And evenings. So, but I also used to treat it a bit like a seance. Like you sit there with a glass of wine in the depths of the night and just wait. You just wait to be visited. And obviously well, it works like maybe 10% of the time.
I think that's actually a really good place to start. I think it's a really, it's a Saturday night and you've got nothing else to do because whatever, the plans fell apart and the glass of wine and then wait to be visited by the spirits. Anyway, no, go on. That's awesome.
No, but it's true. I mean, I used to, when I got home from the pub, I used to sit down and be like, this is my only time to do it. I may have had a pint, but I've got to do it. That's it. And sometimes it can sort of, sometimes it can work. But I also think there was, I don't know. So I did English literature at Oxford. And I think that in a way, there was a part of me that for a long time after I finished that degree, didn't feel that I could write, because it felt like an act of temerity to sort of intrude, because you've been absolutely, it's a fantastic education, it's amazing, but you've been given this incredibly comprehensive view of literature through the ages, and taught the value of the canon and progression, all these made to respect and revere writing as which is right. But I think maybe it's just a personal thing for me. I found it really, really difficult to think about that being something that I could do, like almost like reversing the stream,
right,
to contribute back to it. And I think that held me up for quite some time, because I didn't understand how the two things could even possibly be related, like the sort of the ideas here and the huge wealth of like canonic literature out there.
In some ways, maybe sometimes it's, especially when you're beginning, it's almost easier to get some pages stacked up if you know less. That the more you know, the more intimidating you are.
I think that's right. I certainly felt that way for me too, and I think that also circles back to perhaps why I clung to structure, like classic Gothic structures that had been approved by the history of by history and by scholars. There was a sort of that was the safety net. It was like, oh well, this is the right way to do this, which, as we all know, there is no right way to do it. So I think it took a long time to get. I think this is the impression I hope you're getting. It took a long time to get that book out, and I did a master's in creative writing while doing it, and I still didn't finish till 2 years after that. But I was, and I think also one problem that I find is also, I still have this, when I finish one book, when I start the next, I spend about the first maybe like month writing more of the last book. Like you have to cleanse and that was a problem with, that was a big problem with the second novel as well, as you just like, you don't know how to write is the book you've just written. That's the only one you've written,
Well, and there's that old cliche, which I actually happen to think is true, which is, you only ever learn how to write the book you're writing. And then the next time when you go on to the next book, you have to learn how to write that book.
It's the next
nothing you learned before helps. It's a totally different book, and you have to figure out how to write that one.
I'm still learning that lesson over and over again. And like I might dust your hands and go, well, I know how to write books now. No, you don't. Yeah. You don't. And you get taught that very, very firmly by the next book. I'm so glad you have that too.
So it began with the weekend seance, but what's your process like now?
I mean, now I'm very lucky enough for this to be my job. So I think it's just, you sit down, you have to show up. You show up 9 to 5 or 8 to 7 or whatever you feel like doing.
Are you morning or evening?
Morning for me is better, because the day sort of colors things, doesn't it? You get sort of like other people's ideas and thoughts kind of edge in, and you can sort of taste them. So yeah, morning is better. But also I have a real place in my heart for the sustained kind of like 3-week kind of writing binge, where you just do nothing, where you can actually just, you turn off all communications, and you just like you really commit to it and get into it. Because they don't respond well to neglect. They're like pets or children. They need to be tended, otherwise they go off, and you forget why you were writing it anyway, or you've lost the thread or the connection. So I like a long sustained kind of like really dedicated time. but whatever you can get. Always mornings. Mornings are sort of sacred. How about you? How do you work these days?
I know that I aim for the mornings. I mean, I have, there's the idealized day. And whenever anyone asks me about my writing habit, I give them the idealized day. And I rarely mention that the idealized day actually almost never happens. It's sort of a thing to aim at that's rarely ever reached. I mean, theoretically, the plan is to sit down at 9:30 in the morning and stay at it till I get 1,500 words. Usually it's from 9:30 to 1 p.m. And then lunch afterwards, and then the afternoon is for admin. But then lots of days I wind up working at the one thing I know is that if I sit down to work at 4:30, by then I'm in a bad mood.
Right. I think that's right.
I put it off too long. I felt miserable all day. And the reason why is because I put off what I was supposed to do first to last.
I think that's, for me, it's 3. If I do anything after 3, I don't, sometimes I do get the odd return to the seance moment late at night, but usually after 3 p.m. I'm like, no, the sort of the fresh kind of like dream state part of that you have when you wake up is gone,
Yeah. I heard a thing years ago when I was a huge Smashing Pumpkins fan that Billy Corgan wrote like 1,000 songs in 3 years, and one literally, like not exaggeration, literally wrote like almost 1,000 songs. But the way he was able to do it was he kept his recorder next to the bed and his guitar, and there's a synthesizer on the other side of the room. And his rule was that when he rolled out of bed, he started writing right away, before breakfast, before tea, anything. I mean, the first thing, and he would do an hour of writing music. And he said he was snatching the music out of his dreams.
Wow.
And I always thought that was kind of beautiful. I heard that Bob Dylan did something very similar, at least that Bob Dylan wrote a song a day for about 5 years. And so I do think there's something about early in the morning, especially if you can avoid looking at the phone, if you can stay away from social media, if you can stay clean, if you can stay innocent.
Punctures your state.
Still kind of a little bit with one foot in sleep. That sometimes you can be inventive.
It's called the genius moment. It's and people have tried to I think,
really?
Was it? Yeah. And so I think who was it there was a famous scientist, for the life of me, I can't remember who it was. They used to do this thing where they'd keep they'd hold a big ball bearing in their hand, so that when they dropped off into that moment between sleep and waking, the ball would drop and wake them. So then they could immediately write down their thoughts that they had in that moment. And because I used to have these terrible hypnagogic nightmares, which I thought were ghosts because it's before Google. And I used to wake up in the middle of the night with a hand in the small of my back, shoving me out of bed. And this is a hypnagogic hallucination. It's very common. And but it's that it only happens on that cusp between sleep and waking. And people, I think a lot of the Bloomsbury group, like Virginia Woolf, sort it out.
I've had this too. I'll tell the quick ghost story. Quick ghost story.
Do it.
I felt it too. I've had the same thing exactly. I was years ago, I was driving across Pennsylvania. I had this plan to drive from Western Pennsylvania all the way home to New Hampshire. And what I discovered is that Pennsylvania is really fucking big. It's really, I just drove all day and I was still in Pennsylvania and I just couldn't believe it. And eventually I started to look for a hotel because I thought I'm not going to get out of Pennsylvania. And in the small town of Bethlehem, there was a beautiful 18th century hotel offering a room with a boo. So they had this room in one corner on the 3rd or 4th floor that was guaranteed to be haunted. And I was psyched. I mean, I remember calling my parents and saying, hey, I got a question. I'm going to get this room, the room with the boo. And what I want to know is if they find me dead in the morning and my hair is turned white, are they still going to run my credit card? Because I kind of paid for it, right? So anyway, I got there and actually the room with the boo was taken, but they said they could give me the room right under the room with the boo and that was also supposedly haunted too. So I was like, okay, cool. Give me the second rate haunted room. I'll take it. and I had a lovely night. Bethlehem is a beautiful town. You could look out my window and it was like looking into the past. I mean, there was like a 18th century street lamp down there and brick roads, and I went to sleep, and I woke up at 2 a.m. and there was a girl standing at the foot of the bed, and I couldn't sit up. It was like there was a hand pressed to my chest. And I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Go away." I screamed so loud that the people above me in the room with the boo screamed and fell out of their bed. I could hear the whole thing. So they got their money's worth. I mean, they totally got what they paid for. Yeah. The feeling on my chest relaxed, and I was able to sit up and see there was no girl there. And I was convinced for a year that I had all my life I've wanted to see a ghost. And then, of course, the internet ruins everything. I looked into it, and I guess it's one of these hypnagogic things, huh? And you used to have this all the time?
Yeah, I had. Well, it came on with adolescence. So we used to spend we moved around a lot in Kenya, Yemen, Madagascar, Morocco. But we always came back to Dartmoor. It's very, very low. It's called a Devon Longhouse. It's just this very traditionally built Devon house. Like the walls are like 8 feet thick of granite. And there's been a building on that site since the Doomsday Book. So it's quite,
Wow.
And do you know Dartmoor? It's so beautiful.
Not really.
It looks exactly like Scotland, but it's got wild ponies and heather and beautiful like crags and tors. It's like it's absolutely magical and atmospheric.
Where is it in relationship to London?
It's southwest, so it's like
so it's out by is that out by Tintagel?
Yes, it's above Cornwall. Exactly. Yeah. That's and Tintagel is exactly that sort of vibe. It's very craggy, beautiful, wild, bleak, and it's got like ruins of Iron Age villages everywhere, like scattered everywhere.
Just as random trivia, my desktop picture on my computer is Merlin's Cave at just outside Tintagel.
Oh, have you been?
No, never.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I mean, it definitely wasn't, it's definitely not a very historically accurate site, but it's so atmospheric and it's just beautiful. You can see why human beings would want a mythology to center around this incredible looking place.
Yeah.
But where were we? Yes. Oh, yes. So
hypnagogic. You were talking about
hypnagogic. Yes. So we'd stay in this house every summer, but as soon as I think it was like 12 or 13, I started having this thing where in my room, I would fall asleep and I'd wake up with a hand in the small of my back, giving me a very brisk shove out of bed. And I could feel every finger in the hand, in the small of my back, just pushing. And I'd fall on the floor. So there was nothing to suggest to me that this wasn't completely real. And I did also have that thing of, when you can tell there's someone else in the room, you can't hear them or see them, but you can feel them breathing, So I had that, and I would go and it's happened every night, every summer for about 4 years. And I'd get up and go and spend the rest of the night on the floor of my sister's room. And we never told a grown-up. I don't know why. I suppose like adolescence is so strange anyway. Like everything that's happening to you is so weird that it actually didn't seem any weirder than the rest of it.
I love that now that you're an adult, you've rationalized it away as a hypnagogic experience when clearly it was not.
When clearly it was a ghost, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that makes you sleep better at night, I think that's great. But there's nothing about this story where I'm like, oh yeah, that was just sleep paralysis. I mean, it sounds like a ghost to me.
Yeah, man. Well, they find me. But it was. I remember because I've never been so afraid of that moment. Like ever. There's nothing in the daylight world that's that frightening, and it's proper, like seizes your heart in a cold fist, and you just can't breathe.
I just want to say that this has actually turned into the best conversation. The best conversation I've had with another horror novelist, like pretty much ever in terms of a live thing. Clearly the real secret to these kinds of things is you've got to get into the ghost stories.
Yes, exactly. Everyone's got one, whatever form it takes. But what was I going to say? Yes, but so when I first read The Monkey's Paw, that was my first proper ghost story, I think. I was and I felt that it's amazing. But I felt that feeling again. And I was like, this is where you put this. This is like the cage for that feeling, the architecture that contains that feeling. It's ghost stories. So, and I definitely wouldn't have remembered. I didn't really think much about it throughout my 20s, but obviously when I started writing, that's the feeling that I was channeling as well. Like, so it hung around in whatever it was.
So you talked about Dartmoor
Mm.
and the house that had been there since the Doomsday Book,
Mhm.
and also traveling to other places. I guess I'm wondering, so like, how did an American from Washington, D.C. wash ashore, on the
Yeah.
banks of a northern isle? Do you come from a literary family? Why? What was you really have been a global citizen.
Well, my parents are, my mother's Scottish and my father's English, but I was born in DC and we grew up, I spent a lot of my childhood there because my father's a water economist and he worked for like the World Bank and various development organizations. And the
Yeah.
reason we lived in those places is because we would do placements to do like water strategies for developing countries. Which is kind of an amazing upbringing to have, actually, because they're very right on people, and with like very much like the best version of like the optimism of the 70s, and like they really believe the world can be a better place. But it's, I mean, obviously, as we say, pre-internet, if you move from Kenya to Madagascar, you can't. I mean, there's no way to take friends with you or take anything.
Right.
Like a letter takes 6. And I remember getting telexes, which are sort of like descendants of telegrams in Madagascar. And we had a phone. I don't remember it ever ringing or working. Like, I don't think there was such a thing as, there wasn't very, so communication was difficult. And like a letter takes 6 months from the US to. So it was amazing, but it was you were very reliant on the resources you had.
I have this whole theory that probably a terribly condescending theory, but I have this whole theory that people below a certain age don't completely believe in the past.
Right.
Some of the reactions from sort of people who are a little bit on the younger side, for example, seeing Stranger Things and saying, don't their parents ever care where they are? And it's like anyone who lived through the 80s is like, no, their parents really don't. They're not checking in either.
Yeah. As a friend of mine put it, you have one kid and you raise that one, and the second one you barely raise, and then the third one you let the first one raise that one.
That's right. People, it's so strange now because you call a person, when you want to talk to someone, you call a person. But when I was growing up, just wasn't that long ago, you called a place and hoped the person was there.
That's right.
You called their house and hoped that they were home, and if they weren't, you didn't get them.
Also, you had to meet people, and if you made a plan, you had to be there. There's I'm good. No, sorry.
You couldn't text anyone to say I'm stuck on the train.
You got to be
there. So let's go back a little bit to Last House on Needless Street. We've drifted a little bit.
Yeah, so we got Mission Creep. Okay, yeah.
Andy Serkis, one of the most inventive actors in the film business, optioned Last House on Needless Street. Yes. What can you tell us about that? Ooh. Will you be involved in the film anyway? Do you want to be involved? And did he do the Gollum voice?
Did not do the Gollum voice. The thing is, he's got such charisma, doesn't he? Like, you're like, he's got such a presence about him. I was a bit. It was my first sort of real experience of having a film option, and I was nervous about making the wrong decision. So I was a nightmare for them. We had 3 or 4 different companies trying to interested, and we had a sort of version of a bidding war, but not but mainly because I was so terrified of making the wrong decision that I just dithered. And my agent was saying to me, he's like, Kat, there's no new information that's going to come up here. You have all the information. Nobody knows how it's going to go. It's always a lottery. You just have got to make a decision. And Andy Serkis obviously got really fed up with me in the most charming possible way and just went, right. Andy and Jonathan Cavendish, who's who they run the Imaginarium together, would like to have a call with you and when they had this call, and every single person in the company was on the call, just basically just trying to reinforce the fact. I think they sensed that I was a bit nervous, and they're just reinforcing the fact that they really wanted to do it, and they really felt it was important. And and that fortunately did soothe my nerves enough to say yes, let's do it. But I really did it for such a long time. I'm not surprised they got a bit fed up. But yes, and what I love about them is that they are extremely receptive to author's involvement, which I think is not at all common.
Yes, I agree.
It's not a given at all. So, and they've given me an executive producer title, which is great, which means I just have a seat at the table, which is really, really nice. It's very much up in the air at the moment. We're still in talks with everybody, but I think there's a lot of room to decide how it looks. So if I decide that I wanted to throw my hat in the ring to adapt it, I think that's something they'd be open to. You might get a writer director, like an auteur, who wants to do it their own thing, and in that case I'd be like, fine, but the nice thing is I'm allowed to at least consider those decisions, because mostly you don't get to as a writer at all.
I think it's exciting. You're an executive producer on it. I've been lucky enough to be an executive producer on a couple of projects, and I've got some tips for you. I've actually mastered the skill set of being an executive producer. You go to the set and sit in the wrong chairs.
Yes.
Usually the movie stars' chairs. You eat everything on the craft service table.
Yes. As you should.
And also you get on your phone and you wander through the back of a shot while the cameras are rolling, preferably while the actors are doing something really emotional.
Really intense.
And you're just talking in the background, like, and if you can do all that, you too can master the art of being an executive producer.
Whose chair did you sit in?
I sat in Zachary Quinto's, a couple of directors, and I never miss an opportunity to put my ass in the wrong place. I want to zip through a few. There are a few. We're creeping up on short on time, so I do want to hit a few of the questions in the Q&A. Max Hargard asks, what horror books or movies, if any, helped inspire you when writing The Last House on Needless Street? And I love this question because I had almost the same thing, because I sort of operated the theory that you sort of are what you eat, so the books that matter to you are kind of teach you how to write.
I think the book that really taught, like, was a jumping off point imaginatively for this was Joyce Carol Oates's Zombie, which is about it's based on Jeffrey Dahmer. It's told from the point of view of young Quentin P, who literally kills and eats young black men. So it's just such a beautifully, neatly constructed, terrifying, managing to be this lacerating social commentary, as well as one of the most terrifying pieces of kind of first-person narrative that I've ever read. And the way that she was using like Gothic tactics, like redaction and omission and first-person narrative. So the thing about Gothic is it's got its whole point is it's like the found footage of literature. It's like testament. It's like every single part of it is an assertion that this did happen. It's like presenting itself as evidence.
Yeah, I love
and the way she uses that is just in Zombie is absolutely amazing. That was my most useful book, I think, in writing this. There are a lot of psychological and like clinical textbooks which I use, which I'm not going to talk about because I think that maybe
because they almost talk about it almost has spoilers in it.
Spoiler, exactly.
Yeah.
Another person who's two probably quite unexpected writers who really helped were Kelly Link. Always, everything Kelly Link writes is teaches you that it's the real world that's unreal around you. It's Kelly Link's world that's real.
Kelly, just as a side note, Kelly. So we talk ghost stories. Kelly Link actually has the best true life ghost story that I know.
Does she? Oh,
yeah, it's actually such an upsetting, so clearly true ghost story.
Wow.
It's guaranteed to shake your skepticism. Great.
Wow.
I'm not gonna.
She would.
I had her write it to me and send it to me, and I have it saved in my inbox, but I'm not gonna read it because I kept it saved in my inbox for like 5 years now. But I'm not gonna. I wouldn't ruin her story. So if you ever get a chance to do an event with her, make her tell.
I might actually just try and email her after this. Be like, tell me the story. Because I mean, her mind is a place I could spend infinite time in. So Kelly Link was one. and also strangely, like David Sedaris, when I'm talking, when I was thinking about Olivia in particular, I love this perfect narcissistic unself-consciousness that he gives his sort of fictional own, voice in his essays. And I just think I think he's an absolute genius. And he's also some of his like Naked. I think some of the stories in it are horrifying, like proper horror. So I gained a lot from those.
Well, and there's also that whole thing about, that horror and comedy are almost exactly the same genre.
Yeah. For real.
You see Larry hit Moe with a sledgehammer in the Three Stooges and you laugh.
Yeah.
You see Leatherface hit a teenager with a sledgehammer in Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you scream, but it's actually the same scene.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. Go on, sorry.
Blake Keebler wants to know, what are you reading now?
I just finished an amazing book called Mrs. March by Virginia Fito, which I absolutely loved.
Ooh.
Oh, it's so good. Have you heard of it?
I've got a copy on the shelf.
It's fantastic. And I was reading it and I was like, I got real writer's envy reading it. I was like, oh, she's good. She's so fucking good. And it's about a New York socialite who may or may not be going mad, or her husband may be a serial killer. And the thing is, whichever scenario is true, it's just terrible. And the prose is to die for, and the constrained, again, that amazing tight world, that neurotic, tight, mad world that she lives in is just so compelling. I loved it.
Story jealousy. I'm watching Midnight Mass on Netflix, as I mentioned earlier, and it's the strongest sense of story jealousy I've had in years. Just feeling like, this is so great. I wish I had written it. Riley would like to know, what's the best way for an aspiring writer to get published, with novels or with short stories?
It depends where you are. I think in the States, short stories have much more. You guys have much more of a culture of short stories, which I think is fantastic. Like there are a lot more outlets. There are a lot more places that accept short stories. In the UK here, there isn't so much of that. It's not. It's there just aren't so many places that do them. I think short stories have traditionally been, for a good reason, like the proving ground of a writer. Like they allow you to, do you know what I mean? They sort of allow you to explore your ideas, and they allow you to kind of have a bit of a miniature version of the mammoth horrible task of a novel which awaits you. So a little training ground. So I think both, but I mean, whatever you write, just write and write and write. That's the only thing that will ever make it go away.
I can tell you that publishers want a novel. The big publishers want a novel more than they want a collection of stories. That doesn't mean a collection. That doesn't mean a collection can't get published. It just means that generally they want to launch a writer with a novel.
And they'll do like a 2-book deal of like a collection of short stories, and then followed with a novel sometimes as well, which is quite a good way of doing it.
Kelly Lonesome wants to know if you're she wants to know from both of us if we're a dog person or a cat person. I feel like I should be able to answer for you that you are a cat person. It's both in the name and but maybe I'm wrong. You're a dog person.
I feel like this is a binary we should deconstruct. Like, there are no dog people and cat people. We're all like dog and cat people, I love both. I really do. In fact, my next novel, Sundial, it's very dog heavy. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. I was like, am I making my way through every domestic animal one by one? But it's, I'm both. I would genuinely say I'm both. What about you?
I'm both.
Yeah.
I had a great cat for 14 years. I had a great dog for 14 years. 14 seems to be the unlucky number. I'm really glad Tim Gurney has a great question, and in some ways this is maybe where we should wrap things up, because it's a good question to sail out on. He wants to know if you can give us a heads up on Sundial, because he says, I've heard good things via Twitter but cannot wait for the release. Sundial is the follow-up to Last House on Needless Street. I'm as excited as everyone else.
Oh, thank you. Well, so Sundial is set in the Mojave Desert. It's about a mother, Rob, and who comes to realize that the elder of her daughters, Callie, is experiencing some emotional problems, and she's become dangerous to her younger sister. So she takes her back to her childhood home, Sundial, which is a sort of facility in the middle of the Mojave Desert, where she was brought up with her twin sister, and her parents conducted various, experiments and animal trials. And as Rob tells the story to Callie of their past, their present, and she comes to understand that basically the two are maybe more connected than the past and the present are more connected than they may seem. But they also want to keep, the main thing that drove this book for me is that, like, it's a mother and a daughter, and it's about love and about family. But throughout most of the novel, mother and daughter are each convinced that the other wants to kill them. And I find this a really interesting dynamic because I think the mother-daughter bond is so powerful. And there's such a temptation to make it nice. I don't think there's any. I always wonder why sidestep those incredibly kind of raw, perhaps less socially acceptable aspects of it. But it is like all my books. I think I don't seem to be able to move on from these themes of like love and family and connection. So it's about that, but it's basically a mother and a daughter sitting in a remote, abandoned, like scientific facility in the Mojave Desert, each thinking the other wants to kill them.
Wow.
So there you go.
Caitlin
Another comedy.
Yeah. Another laugh riot. Caitlin wants to know if you'd ever consider teaching writing at some point. I feel like you just did for an hour that we just had, there's a lot here, and has been a lot here this evening for people who love good writing and maybe are interested in doing some of their own.
Yeah, I think the only thing, unfortunately, the bugger of it is the only person who can teach you to write is yourself, really.
Yeah,
it's just.
I think that's true.
Other writers are great teachers in terms of like looking to them, but the only person who can really do it is you. I mean, I do teach writing. I teach a Gothic course for the Arvon Foundation here in the UK, but I'd love to do more. But also, I've got to write some more books.
Right.
I keep remembering that. I'm like, I've got to write a book.
Your publisher hasn't forgotten.
No, I don't have.
Guys, thanks so much. Thanks everyone who tuned in this evening. I don't know about you, but I had a blast. I thought this was great. Kat, you were wonderful. This was terrific.
Joe, you were wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. I loved it.
Thank you both so much. This was such an engaging conversation to get to sit in on. I'm very happy for everybody in the audience who has already read Kat's book. For everybody who has not yet read it, we can't wait for you to get your copies. Truly wonderful. This has been a lovely evening. So thank both of you so much, and to everybody who's in the audience as well.
Thanks, guys. Hang in there and be well.
Good night, everyone.
Take care. Good night.